Joseph.
Hi, my name is Airen Iyamu. We all have our own personal Joseph story to tell. Welcome to my audiobook podcast.
Chapter 4. Times and Seasons.
Joseph finished explaining each dream, and afterwards begged the butler not to forget him in prison, but to use his position as the king's butler to release him from prison. But the butler is busy thinking of his family, friends, house, bed, food, and all that he had missed all that time in prison. He also begins to wonder who must have been behind his imprisonment and how he was going to deal with them. And of course, names began to fill his mind as he plots his comeback to the king's palace. He totally forgets the plea of Joseph, as he acted like he was really listening to Joseph. Meanwhile, all his thoughts were on his comeback. The dream was to come to pass in 3 days' time. So for the butler, 3 days was just seconds away. But for the baker, 3 days should never come. 3 days should not see the sunlight. In short, he wished he was never born, or he regretted the day he took the job to be the king's baker. He should have just stayed in his family business or old job, or should have just been a self-employed man. Thoughts filled his heart as the days became hours and hours became minutes and the minutes seconds. He hoped and wished he could dream another dream that would counter the first dream, but all that came to nothing. Why Joseph saw the 3 days as an end to his imprisonment, an end to his injustice by his brothers, and by the hands of Potiphar's wife, he started seeing himself on his way back home, hoping he could still know his way back home. He even starts asking other prisoners about the way back home, and some gave him the directions, and some may have even done business with his brothers. His hopes are alive again. His confidence of leaving the prison brightens his face. He was certain the butler would keep his word. The trust grows as he goes day by day to remind the butler and receives reassurance that he will keep his word. How sometimes we fail to look to God even in such an hour, because all our feelings tell us is that this is God, and if it was not God, why then would he bring them to prison and allow him, Joseph, to be in charge of them, build up a good relationship, and to crown it all, help them interpret their dreams? Come on, this is God all the way, we would say. And just maybe on the inside of us, the sweet, gentle voice of the Holy Spirit tells us it's God, but it's not his time. That voice, my friend, I would not want to listen to. Let me tell you the truth. Come on, voice. I have been here for 17 years now. Come on. If this is not the time, then when will that time come? I'm 28 years old now, and all my mates are married with kids, driving their own cars, living in their own homes. They are graduates, and some even have masters and PhD. Some are millionaires, billionaires, and here you are telling me it's not yet time? I have walked upright all my life. I avoided Mrs. Potiphar, and here is what it got me. What wrong did I do to my brothers that made them sell me as a slave? Or is it because my mother was not alive? If she was, she would have fought for me. I understand what Joseph was thinking and his response to the inward voice, because I too have been there. I may not have walked upright like Joseph, but I too spoke out my dreams, and I too paid the same price Joseph did for speaking out the dreams of God over my life. While I was in my own prison, my brothers were enjoying the good things of the house, and how it hurts when you're like a second-class citizen in your father's house. Well, Joseph still goes ahead in planning how his days are now numbered in jail, and how he will be leaving soon. So to him, it was now a matter of days and not whenever.
Joseph, Prison to Palace by Airen Iyamu. Copyright 2020. This book cannot be distributed by any electronic or mechanical means, in print or online. No part of it may be altered, reproduced, or downloaded without the express written permission of the author. All Bible references taken from King James Version. Published by Mount Chris Ventures, a Testimony City Media Publications, designed and printed by Alpha Toa Communications, ISBN 978-978-984-6122. All rights reserved. Soundtrack for the novel Joseph titled No God Like You, performed by Revival Train Music.
Hi, my name is Moses Airen Iyamu. We all have our own personal Joseph story to tell. Welcome to my audiobook podcast.
A violent gang is trying to kill me. You mean nothing to them, but Lord, you are a God of compassion. Lord, have mercy on
Joseph, Prison to Palace, Chapter 5. The Fulfillment.
The third day finally comes, and it's not just a day like any other day in the Egyptian calendar. It was the birthday of the king of Egypt. It was one of the most important days in the Egyptian calendar because to the Egyptians, the king was a god. So they were going to celebrate his birthday. And it was also a very important day to two people in prison because to one, it was a new beginning, a new opportunity, a day of forgiveness of sins and restoration of lost glory, a day of great honor and respect, a day of life and family. It was the day the butler would be set free from prison and restored back to his rightful place as the king's cupbearer. But to the baker, he was not as fortunate as the butler. He was going to be killed on a day of national celebration, a day when all of Egypt would be rejoicing. He would be killed. Now, that was not a day to look forward to, because from the day he first got the interpretation of his dreams, he was already dead. So to him, that death had come. What that day was going to do was to finish what had taken place in the prison 3 days ago. The dreams come to pass on the third day. One is restored to his former place, while the other is hanged. The one restored celebrates with the rest of Egypt as their king marks his birthday with his entire family and friends, while on the other side of the city, another is hanged and his family and friends mourn for him. Such is life, that as one rises, another falls. As one celebrates, other cries. As one is being born, another is dying. One goes up to glory, another goes down to damnation. And this is the life we have been born to meet. The life Adam caused us to endure because of his treason in the garden. Thank God we don't all have to go down to damnation. We don't have to cry when a loved one goes either, because we know the end of a believer's life is glory. It's eternal life, and it's a life meant for us all to live and enjoy here and in eternity. Mr. Butler is back home with family and friends. He returns to his former job, and life is all good again for him and everyone in the palace. His old colleagues are glad he is back, even his enemies. But the only one that is not happy is the cupbearer that took his place while he was in prison. But apart from that, all is good, and how good it is for him to be back in business. Back to a place he has been for more than 20 years and has come to love with all of his heart.
Joseph, Prison to Palace by Moses Airen Iyamu. Copyright 2020. This book cannot be distributed by any electronic or mechanical means, in print or online. No part of it may be altered, reproduced, or downloaded without the express written permission of the author. All Bible references taken from King James Version. Published by Mount Chris Ventures, a Testimony City Media Publications, designed and printed by Alpha Toa Communications, ISBN 978-978-984-6122. All rights reserved. Soundtrack for the novel Joseph titled No God Like You, performed by Revival Train Music.
Oh God, insolent people rise up against me. I
My name is Moses Airen Iyamu. We all have our own personal Joseph story to tell. Welcome to my audiobook podcast.
A violent gang is trying to kill me. You mean nothing to them, but Lord, you are a God of compassion. Lord, have mercy on me.
Joseph, Prison to Palace. Chapter 6. The Disappointment.
2 years went by so quickly, and another year was about to begin, and Joseph still found himself in prison. I wonder what he must have been going through emotionally after waiting for days, weeks, and months. And then another year was ending, and he was still in prison. It must have devastated him emotionally. He must have sworn never to interpret dreams again or trust anyone. The disappointment, the voices telling him things, sowing negative thoughts in his mind after all his hopes and expectations of his release from prison had all been dashed. He never hears or sees the butler again. The only place he ever sees the butler is on the front pages of the dailies or on TV. This man lied to me, would have been the thought going through his mind. He played me after all I did for him, after even helping to interpret his dream. Now see what he has done. I wish I never interpreted that dream for him. I wish he was the baker and the baker was the butler. What Joseph and sometimes you and I don't know is that whether it was the butler or baker, God would still have made sure he got Joseph in prison. It was not the butler to dictate how Joseph's liberty would happen. It was not even Joseph to call the shots for his liberty. Whether he had interpreted the dream or not, the butler would still have been released in 3 days, and the baker would still have been hanged on the tree. Why God used Joseph was for his purpose and his alone, and no one can question his plans and counsel. Sometimes, and very many a time, our destiny is just the tip of the iceberg in God's eternal picture. And until we begin to open our eyes to see the big picture, we may never fully grasp his great plan, and therefore will fail to appreciate why he picked us. Can you still remember when God came to visit Abraham in Genesis 16? That was a time when Abraham was wondering and very disturbed about the seed God promised him. Because early that day, one of his chief servants had just given birth to a baby boy. And this made Abraham to think and wonder when he too would have his own promised son. Or was his servant's son going to inherit his wealth? Then God calls out to him to come out of his tents after Abraham questions God's promises that he made to him some few years ago. Then God tells Abraham to offer a sacrifice, and when the sacrifice was ready, God allowed a deep sleep to come on Abraham, and in that sleep he had a dream where God showed him his fourth generation as slaves in a strange land, and that they will be there for 400 years, after which he will come to deliver them with a mighty hand and spoil that land.
Joseph, Prison to Palace by Moses Airen Iyamu. Copyright 2020. This book cannot be distributed by any electronic or mechanical means, in print or online. No part of it may be altered, reproduced, or downloaded without the express written permission of the author. All Bible references taken from King James Version. Published by Mount Chris Ventures, a Testimony City Media Publications, designed and printed by Alpha Toa Communications, ISBN 978-978-984-6122. All rights reserved. Soundtrack for the novel Joseph titled No God Like You, performed by Revival Train Music.
Oh God, insolent people rise up against me. A violent gang is trying to kill me. You mean nothing to them, but Lord, you are a God.
Hi, my name is Moses Airen Iyamu. We all have our own personal Joseph story to tell. Welcome to my audiobook podcast.
A violent gang is trying to kill me. You mean nothing to them, but Lord, you are a God of compassion. Lord, have mercy on me.
Joseph, Prison to Palace. Chapter 7. I remember.
So 2 years have come and gone, and still no word from the butler. No phone calls, text messages, emails. not even an invite on Facebook, nothing to show he still remembers what Joseph did for him. I tell you, if I ever lay my eyes on such a fellow again, I would really give him a piece of my mind and tell the whole world what kind of a friend he really is. But that's not the kind of person Joseph was. He was not a superhuman, but he had learned over the years from his brother's experience, the Potiphar's experience, that once one door closes, another will one day open, and life must go on. He must have really been a man of great pain and deep sorrows, and sometimes all these things help to mold a great character in one's life. Sometimes for good, sometimes for evil. And people that have gone through half of what Joseph went through turned their backs on God, while some held on to the very end. Those that turned their backs on God became atheists, and those that held on became healers to nations. This was the man who he took good care of, helped make sure all was well. When he was sad, tried to uplift his spirit, and when the issue of the dream came, he was used by God to interpret it for him. Now he is enjoying, and Joseph is still in prison. Ouch. What a life, my friend. What a life. And the Bible says we must still love such people no matter what. And Joseph did, because there was no record of he ever hating the man. So in order for God's counsel to stand on when and how Joseph leaves prison, God had to make sure he gets the butler's mind off Joseph's plea. Sometimes when the butler would share his experience with his friends and family, because people would always want to know how life was in prison, he would always forget Joseph. Even if he mentioned his name, it would be on the basis that he was the one that helped make sure he had a good stay in prison. He just always seemed to forget the interpreter, because if he remembered, Joseph would have been out one way or another. Someone would probably have advised him to get Joseph out for monetary purposes, and God did not want that for Joseph. So it came to pass that at the end of the 2 years, an angel from heaven came with 2 dreams to share with the king of Egypt while he slept. The first one woke him up, and that really disturbed his sleep. He tried to sleep, but the dream wouldn't just let go. And after a while, he managed to sleep. But a second dream, like the first, came, and that really woke him up a second time. The dream left such a great impact in his spirit. He thought of it for a while and then went back to bed. He wakes up in the morning, takes his bath, wears his royal robe and gold crown, and heads out to have breakfast. It was on the point of trying to eat his food that the pictures of the dream flashed through his mind, and he jumps up and runs down to his throne room. He summons all his magicians and wise men to his palace and reiterates the dream to them and seeks for their interpretations. The wise men and magicians are stunned as they all look at each other and wonder who can tell a dream's interpretation. I wonder how the king must have felt when none from all his well-paid magicians and wise men were able to tell him the meaning of his dream. They could not even try to cook up something to at least show they really were magicians and wise men. It was then that the butler remembered the same scenario he had with Joseph and asked for the king's forgiveness. The reason he did was because of the sin he had committed to Joseph by promising him he would tell the king about him. Everything then came before his face. He told the king that 2 years ago, he, the king, was angry with him and the baker and sent them both to prison. And while in prison, they met a young man who was kind and very caring to them. This young man helped them survive the prison house. And there was one night himself and the baker each had a disturbing dream. They were unable to sleep since they could not figure out the meaning of their dreams. The next day, this young man, whose name is Joseph, walked in, and when he saw their countenance, he asked them what was wrong, and they shared their dreams with him. He smiled at us, says the butler, and asked if that was why we were so worried and dejected. He told us that there is a God who knows how to interpret dreams. So he interpreted mine by saying I would be reinstated back to being your cupbearer, and that the baker would die, and all these will happen within 3 days. And within 3 days, my lord, the king, it happened just as this young man, Joseph, had said it would. And today I am your cupbearer again, and the baker has been long dead." You could see both the annoyance and joy on the king's face. Annoyance because the butler knew such a fella, and he allowed the king to waste his time with these false magicians and so-called wise men that are just tricksters. And joy because he could finally get the answer he desperately needed. The royal guards rushed down to the prison house and asked who Joseph was, and immediately they laid their eyes on him. He was rushed out of prison. Some of the prisoners would have wondered what he had done, and those who were already used to the workings of the royal guards would have concluded that it was the end of Joseph's life. The news that the royal guards came to pick up Joseph spread like wildfire, and it also got to the house of Potiphar. To all that heard the news, Joseph was dead, and there was nothing anybody could do to save him. I can just see Potiphar's face as he rejoices, and the face of his wife as she wished Joseph would have just slept with her. All those years of imprisonment and now being carried away by the king's royal guard would never have happened. The royal guards take Joseph out as he begs to find out from them what of the wrong he had done, and all they tell him is that the king wanted him now, and that was all. He seals his fate for the worse. And what more after all these 17 years in prison? Now the king wants him for what he does not know about. To him, death had finally come, and if he must die, then let it be at least that he served God faithfully to the end. He was shocked when they took him into a room in the palace and gave him to the king's maids to clean him up. They gave him a neat shave and anointed him with sweet aroma. This all shocked him to his bones. Perhaps the king wants him all netted up before his death. Then comes in the butler to meet Joseph while he was being prepared to meet the king. He apologizes to Joseph and tells Joseph he can't just explain why and how he could forget him all these years in prison. Joseph had no choice but to accept his apologies. He then tells Joseph why he had been summoned by the king and prays that Joseph can help the king with the interpretation of his dreams. He leads Joseph into the king's throne room, introduces him to the king, and by that time all of Egypt had heard about what was taking place in the king's palace. News quickly reaches Potiphar's house. He and his wife quickly dressed up to go and see for themselves what strange thing was about to happen in the palace. When they get to the king's palace, they are shocked to see Joseph all neatly dressed up with the Egyptian attire and standing before the king, and they wondered what could be going on.
Joseph, Prison to Palace by Moses Airen Iyamu. Copyright 2020. This book cannot be distributed by any electronic or mechanical means, in print or online. No part of it may be altered, reproduced, or downloaded without the express written permission of the author. All Bible references taken from King James Version. Published by Mount Chris Ventures, a Testimony City Media Publications, designed and printed by Alpha Toa Communications, ISBN 978-978-984-6122. All rights reserved. Soundtrack for the novel Joseph titled No God Like You, performed by Revival Train Music.
Oh God, insolent people rise up against me. A violent gang is trying to kill me. You mean nothing to
Joseph.
Hi, my name is Moses Airen Iyamu. We all have our own personal Joseph story to tell. Welcome to my audiobook podcast.
Chapter 8. The Promise.
Then the king tells everyone to be quiet as he talks with Joseph and tells him how he had heard that Joseph could interpret dreams that no other man could. Joseph replies by telling the king that interpretations of dreams come from God, and he alone can help interpret the dream for the king.
No pagan God is like unto my God. If I search the entire world, I don't think I'll ever find. Take your stand, make your claims. What is your fate? What do you believe in? Say what you believe. worshippers of Baal and idols that have no life. Why do you serve these gods that have no life?
But they have eyes.
But they cannot see you.
They have ears.
They cannot hear you.
They have mouths.
They cannot speak, can't you see?
Lord, no pagan god is like you. None can do what you do. All the nations you made will come and bow before you, Lord. They will praise your name.
So the king goes on to share his dream with Joseph, who listens attentively to every word the king says. When the king was through, Joseph told the king that his dreams, being two, are actually one and the same. And the whole crowd murmurs. A shout echoed by the king, and the dead silence enters the whole room. So Joseph then begins to help the king see what he meant when he said the dreams were one, even though it came the second time. He explains to the king that when a dream comes twice, it means it has been designed to happen, and it cannot be changed, since it's by the hand of God. He goes on to tell the king the full interpretation and gives the king sound wisdom and deep knowledge on what to do and how to do it. So Joseph tells him to pick someone who will use this wisdom and knowledge he has given to the king to make sure the dream works and his people will not suffer. For the dream will come to pass, and that nothing can stop it from happening, just the way the king saw it in his dream. The king stands up with all his power and glory for Joseph and asks if there's anyone amongst the living like him, and that his dwelling is with the gods. He asks who but Joseph could supervise the operations. So he makes Joseph his prime minister and makes him lord over all of his subjects and household, including his wife and children. But the only thing that Joseph was not lord over was his place as king. Immediately, Joseph was given a ring from the king's hand, and a royal robe was placed on his back, and the king's horse was given to him to ride him around all of Egypt to announce his lordship over Egypt, which was the superpower in those days. So from that day, he was taken by the king's royal guards into the palace. Joseph was crowned the prime minister of the world. Oh, you could see the face of Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar. They went dead as they had to bow before their new prime minister, a position that never existed in the whole of Egyptian history until Joseph arrived on the scene. So Joseph, was it worth it? Joseph, was it worth it? Tell us, was it really worth it? Your brother selling you as a slave? Yes, Mr. Potiphar buying you, his wife lying against you, and you spending 17 years in prison. The butler also forgetting to keep his promise, and you still keeping your faith in your God. So tell us, Joseph, was it all worth it? And Joseph responds with a deep sigh and the prime minister's smile on his face. Yes, it was, and I would do it all over again. The end.
Joseph, Prison to Palace by Moses Airen Iyamu. Copyright 2020. This book cannot be distributed by any electronic or mechanical means, in print or online. No part of it may be altered, reproduced, or downloaded without the express written permission of the author. All Bible references taken from King James Version. Published by Mount Chris Ventures, a Testimony City Media Publications, designed and printed by Alpha Toa Communications, ISBN 978-978-984-6122. All rights reserved. Soundtrack for the novel Joseph titled No God Like You, performed by Revival Train Music.
Insolent people rise up against me. A violent gang is trying to kill me. You mean nothing to them, but Lord, you are a God of compassion. Lord, have mercy on me. I'm calling you whenever I'm in trouble. You would answer, protect me. I'm devoted to you, Master. Keep me in the secret place of your shelter, and I'll give praise to your name forever. Lord, when we look around the world and see the works of your hands, we say there is none like you. plain to see that there is none like you.
No pagan God is like unto my God. If I search the entire world, I don't think I'll ever find. Take your stand, make your claims. What is your fate? What do you believe in? Say what you believe. Come, you worshippers of Baal and idols that have no life. Why do you serve these gods that have no life?
But they have eyes.
But they cannot see you.
They have ears.
They cannot hear you.
They have mouths.
They cannot speak, can't you see?
Lord, no pagan God is like you. None can do what you do. All the nations you made will come and bow before you, Lord. They will praise your name. Lord, no pagan God is like you. None can do what you do. All the nations you made will come and bow before you, Lord. They will praise your name. Have you thought about who created you? Have you thought about who's been seeing you through? Only a fool says there is no God. Only a fool says there is no God.
The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people all belong to Him. He laid the foundation of the earth on the seas and built it up on the ocean depths. And built it up on the ocean depths.
Oh Lord, when we look around the world and see the works of your hands, we say there is none like you. None can do the things you do. It's so plain to see that there is none like you. Lord, no pagan God is like you. None can do what you do. All the nations you made will come and bow before you, Lord. They will praise your name. Lord, no pagan God is like you. None can do what you do. All the nations you made will come and bow before you, Lord. They will praise your name.
Joseph.
Hi, my name is Moses Airen Iyamu. We all have our own personal Joseph story to tell. Welcome to my audiobook podcast.
Chapter 3. The Gift.
Like I said earlier, Joseph was not interpreting dreams in Egypt, and there was no record of him ever doing that up until these two men had their own separate dreams. The only dream and interpretation Joseph had ever had was his dreams in his father's house, and that was what led to him being in Egypt. He went from Potiphar's house straight to prison, so no one in Egypt or in the prison knew that Joseph had his gift. Perhaps, if it was known, he may not have been in prison for that amount of time. News would have reached the king about a strange young man who can interpret dreams, and the king would have taken Joseph out of prison and made him his chief magician. Or Mr. Potiphar would have used Joseph's ability and gifts to enrich himself. So from all indications, no one knew Joseph had this gift, not even Joseph himself. All he knew was that he had some dreams, and he knew the interpretations of his dreams. Of all the dreams the two men have been having since they got into prison, why was it that it was this particular night they both had dreams, and that these dreams were the most important to them? And it all happens that Joseph was the only man to interpret it for them. I see God here. Don't know about you. When something good wants to happen in one's life, that's when he shows up to stir up your faith, just in case it's lost its hold in him. In that morning, after they both had dreams that they both could not fathom. That was when Joseph showed up with the interpretation thereof, and things began to happen. Well, let's not forget about the baker's dream, for he too had a dream that night. He too was worried and confused and dejected. But after hearing the chief butler's dream interpretation from Joseph, he too was also expecting to hear good news for his own dream. Then Joseph tells him the interpretation of his dream, and it was not what he was expecting to hear. I bet you he must have told Joseph to listen closely to his dream, because he figured Joseph was still carried away with the butler's joy. So he hits Joseph on his legs and says, "Joseph, you are not getting me. You are not listening to mine. You are still carried away with this butler's dream, or maybe with your own situation." Because I know that's what I would have done. I would have bound and loosed Joseph's mind and gifts. I would have rejected his interpretations and say, "Get thee behind me, Satan. That's not my portion." But unknown to this man, that was not going to change, for the dream was going to stay, and there was nothing he or Joseph could do about it. Now, this may not sound too well for a lot of people, but see it from God's vantage point. Now, what if God was to allow this man to go free? Who knows if he was planning on killing the king? And that would have affected Joseph's chances of being prime minister. We were never told what they both did to the king for him to have sent them both to jail. All we know is that the king was angry with them and sent them both to jail. That's why I say we should try to see it from God's point of view, because He alone sees and knows things we don't, or we could see it in a different way. They both are released from jail. He cooks a good meal for the king that gladdens his heart. The king asks him what he would want him to do for him, and he tells the king about an innocent man in prison. The king releases Joseph, and Joseph makes his way back to his father's house, far away from his place of destiny, because the baker would have so disturbed the butler to tell the king about Joseph, and that was not in God's plans. I know we would love to get out of our deep waters and come out of our fire so quickly that we will try to use our gifts and callings to do it. But God sees what we don't see and knows what we don't know. For in His time, He makes all things beautiful, and He works all things after the counsel of His own will. And He makes all things work together for good for those that love Him and are called according to His, not theirs, but His purpose. God can pick anybody or create anybody for a specific job on earth. He knows who He wants and what He wants from that person. He knows who to use and who not to use, the specifics and qualities that the material must possess in order to help him or her achieve the required task at hand. It's not strange that all through the Bible we see men and women who did the most unique tasks for God succeed in doing them very well. They were not replaced like Adam, Moses, Saul, and Judas were, just to name a few. They finished their task and finished strong. The task was for them and them alone. People like Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, David, Jesus, and Paul, still to name but a few, are amongst that class of those that finished and finished well.
Joseph, Prison to Palace by Moses Airen Iyamu. Copyright 2020. This book cannot be distributed by any electronic or mechanical means, in print or online. No part of it may be altered, reproduced, or downloaded without the express written permission of the author. All Bible references taken from King James Version. Published by Mount Chris Ventures, a Testimony City Media Publications, designed and printed by Alpha Toa Communications, ISBN 978-978-984-6122. All rights reserved. Soundtrack for the novel Joseph titled No God Like You, performed by Revival Train Music.